Dadperfectrevenge. After my wife Ruth died, her sons said, "We want the estate, the business, everything." My lawyer begged me to fight. I said, "Give it all to them." Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. At the final hearing, I signed the papers. The boys smiled until their lawyer turned pale when he read one sentence. "I'm Gary Foster, 59 years old, and I'm about to tell you how my dead wife got the last laugh on her greedy sons." The funeral flowers were still fresh when they decided to destroy me. I sat in Ruth's home office, the same chair where she'd spent countless evenings managing our finances and planning our retirement together. 18 years of marriage, and now I was supposed to pretend that the two men standing before me had any right to decide my fate. Oliver, Ruth's eldest son, wore his mother's death like an expensive suit, perfectly tailored to his advantage. At 35, he had that slick financial consultant look, all confidence and calculation. His steel gray eyes swept over me with the cold assessment of a businessman evaluating a bad investment. "Gary," he said, his voice carrying that tone I'd grown to hate over the years. "We need to discuss some practical matters." Arthur, 3 years younger, but somehow looking older with his soft jawline and nervous energy, stood beside his brother like a loyal lieutenant. Where Oliver was sharp edges and calculated moves, Art was passive aggression wrapped in false concern. "We know this is difficult," Art added, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Losing Mom so suddenly, it's been hard on all of us. Hard on all of us." As if they'd been the ones holding Ruth's hand during those long nights in the hospital. As if they'd been the ones making impossible decisions about treatments and pain management. They'd shown up for the funeral, of course. Oliver flying in from his practice in Denver. Art driving up from Phoenix, where he ran some real estate outfit. But during the 4 months of Ruth's illness, when it really mattered, I'd been alone. "What kind of practical matters?" I asked, though something cold was already settling in my stomach. Oliver exchanged a look with Art, a silent communication perfected over decades of shared secrets. It was the kind of look that excluded everyone else in the room. Everyone like me. "The estate," Oliver said simply. "Mom's assets, the properties, the business interests. We need to sort out how everything will be distributed." I felt my fingers tighten around the arms of Ruth's chair. The leather was worn smooth from years of her hands in the same position, and I found comfort in that familiar texture. Ruth and I discussed this extensively. She assured me that everything was taken care of. "Well, yes," Art said, his tone suggesting I was missing something obvious. "Mom did make provisions, but perhaps she didn't explain the full complexity of the situation." Oliver pulled out a manila folder from his briefcase and set it on Ruth's desk, the same desk where she'd kissed me goodbye every morning for 18 years. The folder was thick, official-looking, intimidating in the way that legal documents always were. "The will is quite clear," Oliver continued, opening the folder with theatrical precision. "The house here in Sacramento, valued at approximately $650,000, goes to Art and myself jointly. The cabin at Lake Tahoe, $550,000, also goes to us. The business investments, roughly $400,000, will be distributed between us as well." Each number hit me like a physical blow. Our home, the place where Ruth and I had built our life together, where we'd hosted Christmas dinners and anniversary parties, where we'd talked about growing old together, gone. The cabin where we'd spent our honeymoon, where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary, where Ruth had told me she'd love me for the first time, gone. "And what about me?" I asked quietly. Art shifted uncomfortably, but Oliver's expression remained unchanged. "Well, naturally, there's the life insurance policy. $140,000. That should be more than sufficient for your needs going forward. $140,000 for a 59-year-old man who'd given up his construction supervisor career to care for his dying wife. For someone who'd spent the last decade managing Ruth's household, supporting her business ventures, being her rock through every challenge. $140,000 to start over." "I see," I said, though I didn't see it all. This couldn't be right. Ruth had promised me that I'd be taken care of, that I'd never have to worry about security or stability. "It's not personal, Gary," Art said, and the false gentleness in his voice made my skin crawl. "It's just that Mom always intended for the family assets to stay within the bloodline. You understand? Bloodline." As if the 18 years I'd spent as Ruth's husband, as Oliver and Art's stepfather, meant nothing. As if love and commitment were somehow less valid than genetics. Of course, Oliver added. We're not heartless. You can stay in the house for 30 days while you make arrangements. We think that's more than fair. Fair? They thought 30 days to uproot a life was fair. I looked around the office, taking in the familiar details that would soon belong to someone else. The bookshelf where Ruth kept her business journals. The window that looked out onto the garden we'd planned together. The small photograph on her desk, not of Oliver or Art, but of Ruth and me on our wedding day, both of us laughing at something I could no longer remember. There is one more thing, Oliver said, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. He pulled another document from the folder, this one smaller, but somehow more ominous. Mom accumulated some significant medical bills during her final illness. The insurance covered most of it, but there's still about $120,000 outstanding. Since you were her husband and presumably made medical decisions jointly, the hospital and doctors are looking to you for payment. The room seemed to spin slightly. $120,000 in debt with only $140,000 from the life. Insurance to cover it. That would leave me with $20,000 to rebuild my entire life. But surely the estate, I began. The estate assets are tied up in probate, Art interrupted smoothly. And given the specific terms of the will, those debts are considered separate from the inherited properties. It's unfortunate, but that's how these things work legally. I stared at them both, these two men who'd called me dad at their mother's funeral just 5 days ago. Oliver with his perfectly pressed suit and cold eyes. Art with his soft features and voice that suggested concern while delivering cruelty. I need some time to process this, I said finally. Of course, Oliver said, standing and straightening his jacket. Take all the time you need, but remember, the 30-day clock starts tomorrow, and those medical bills, well, the longer they sit, the more complicated things become. They left me alone in Ruth's office, surrounded by the ghosts of our life together and the crushing weight of my new reality. The silence was deafening. No comfort, no reassurance, no suggestion that perhaps we could work together to find a solution that honored both Ruth's wishes and my basic human need for security. I sat there as the afternoon light shifted across the room, creating shadows that seemed to mock the brightness Ruth and I had once shared here. My hands found the small drawer in Ruth's desk, where she'd always kept her personal items. Inside, beneath old receipts and business cards, my fingers touched something unexpected. A small key I'd never seen before. The key was old brass, worn smooth with handling. It didn't fit any lock I could think of in the house, but Ruth had kept it in her most private space. Why? As I held the key up to the light, I noticed something else. Through the window, I could see Oliver's car was still in the driveway. He and Art were standing beside it, their heads close together in animated conversation. They were celebrating, I realized, dividing up their inheritance, planning what they'd do with their newfound wealth. Neither of them looked back at the house where their stepfather sat alone, with the ruins of his life spread out before him. But as I watched them drive away, something strange happened. Instead of the despair I expected to feel, a different emotion began to take root. It started small, just a whisper in the back of my mind, but it grew stronger with each passing moment. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd successfully erased me from Ruth's legacy, reduced me to nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed with the minimum legal requirements. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Ruth had always been more cunning than either of her sons realized. The key in my hand seemed to grow warmer as I held it, as if it were trying to tell me something. That night, I called Dorothy Martinez, my old friend from my construction days who'd become a lawyer after going back to school in her 40s. We'd worked on the same housing development project 15 years ago, and she'd saved my company thousands when a contractor tried to pull a fast one. "Dot," I said when she answered, "I need your help. Something doesn't feel right about Ruth's will. Gary, what's going on?" I heard about Ruth. "I'm so sorry for your loss." I told her everything. The meeting with Oliver and Art, the numbers that didn't add up, the way they'd rushed through everything without giving me time to think. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. "Gary," she said finally, "bring me everything they gave you tomorrow morning, and that key you found. That's important. Ruth was too smart and too careful to leave you with nothing. There's more to this story. You really think so? I know so. I've seen this before. Adult children who suddenly become very interested in their parents' estates when death approaches. Ruth was sharp as a tack every time I saw her. She wouldn't have left you high and dry. After 18 years. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the key, about Ruth's careful planning for everything else in our life together. She'd been the one who insisted we get good life insurance, who made sure our house was properly maintained, who planned our finances down to the penny. It didn't make sense that she'd leave such a crucial decision to chance. The next morning, I searched the house methodically. I tried the key on every drawer, every cabinet, every storage space I could think of. Nothing. But then I remembered something. Ruth had always been secretive about her banking. She'd handle the monthly statements herself, file them away in a system only she understood. I went through her filing cabinet more carefully, looking not just at the papers, but at the way they were organized. Hidden behind a folder labeled utility bills was something that didn't belong. A small business card for First National Bank on J Street, with a handwritten number on the back. 247. My heart started pounding. Ruth had never banked at First National. We'd use Sacramento Credit Union for everything. So why did she have their business card, and what was that number? I called the bank and spoke to Helen Rodriguez, the manager. "I'm Gary Foster," I said. "My wife Ruth recently passed away, and I found a card for your bank with the number 247 written on it. I'm wondering if it might be related to a safety deposit box. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Foster." "Yes, box 247 is registered to Ruth Foster. You're listed as the co-holder. Would you like to come in and access it? The key opens safety deposit box 247 at First National Bank." Helen Rodriguez led me down to the vault, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The basement vault felt like a tomb, all polished metal and hushed voices. "Mrs. Foster was very specific about this box," Helen said, as we descended the marble steps. "Only you and she had access. She opened it about 8 months ago and visited several times in the months before her passing. 8 months ago. Right around the time Ruth's health had started declining, when she'd begun having those mysterious meetings with lawyers that she'd never quite explained to me. She'd said they were just updating some paperwork, nothing important. The box was larger than I'd expected and heavier. Helen left me alone in the small viewing room, and with trembling fingers, I lifted the metal lid. Inside were documents. Lots of them. But these weren't the legal papers I'd expected. These were personal letters, printed emails, financial statements, and what looked like surveillance reports. The first thing that caught my eye was a letter in Ruth's handwriting, dated just 6 weeks before her death. The envelope was marked, "For Gary," open only after reading everything else. I set that aside and picked up the next document, a printed email exchange between Oliver and someone named Marcus Crawford. The timestamp showed it was from 10 months ago, and as I read, my blood grew cold. "Marcus, Mom's getting worse. The doctors think she's got maybe 6 months. We need to move faster on the asset transfer. Can you expedite the paperwork we discussed?" The reply was equally chilling. "Oliver, I've prepared the documents as requested. Once your mother signs, the business assets will be restructured under the shell companies we established. The personal properties can be transferred immediately upon death. What about Gary? Gary won't be a problem. He doesn't understand the business side, and by the time he figures out what's happening, it'll be too late. Your mother trusts us completely." I had to read it twice before the meaning sank in. They'd been planning this for months. While I was caring for Ruth, driving her to doctor appointments, managing her medications, cooking special meals, when she couldn't keep regular food down, her sons were plotting to steal not just from me, but from their own mother. The next document was a bank statement, for an account I'd never heard of, Foster Holdings, LLC. The balance showed $750,000. Below it was a handwritten note from Ruth. "Gary, this is our real savings. The boys think all my money is tied up in the house and business, but I moved the bulk of our assets here 8 months ago. I was trying to protect us. $750,000. We weren't poor. We weren't even struggling." Ruth had been quietly building wealth, while her sons thought she was just getting by on her modest investments and our construction income. My hands were shaking as I reached for the next item, a folder labeled "Private Investigation, Confidential." Inside were photographs, financial records, and a summary report from someone named Howard Peterson, licensed private investigator. The photos showed Oliver entering and leaving what appeared to be an upscale casino in Reno. The timestamps indicated he'd made multiple trips over the past year, sometimes staying for several days. The financial records painted an even grimmer picture. Oliver owed $140,000 to various creditors, most of them connected to high-stakes investment failures and what looked like gambling debts. Art's file was just as damning. The investigation had uncovered that his real estate business was actually a front for a series of failed property flips. He'd lost nearly $160,000 of other people's money, including funds that belonged to several elderly clients who'd trusted him with their retirement savings. There were copies of complaint letters from clients threatening legal action. Both of Ruth's sons were drowning in debt and facing potential legal troubles. No wonder they were so eager to get their hands on their inheritance. But there was more. The most devastating document was a medical report dated 2 months before Ruth's death. It wasn't from her regular doctor. This was from a neurologist I'd never heard of, Dr. Patricia Williams at UC Davis Medical Center. The summary was brief but conclusive. Patient shows no signs of anyone who would listen, that Ruth's illness was affecting her judgment, that she wasn't capable of making sound decisions about her estate. I'd even heard Oliver tell someone at the funeral that Mom wasn't really herself those last few months. But this report proved otherwise. Ruth had been completely mentally competent right up until the end. The final document in the folder was a copy of a different will, not the one Oliver had shown me, but one dated just 4 weeks before Ruth's death. This will left everything to me, with modest trust funds for Oliver and Art that would pay out $25,000 annually, but couldn't be accessed all at once. A note in the margin in Ruth's handwriting read, "Original held by Peterson and Associates, not Martinez Firm." My heart pounded as the pieces fell into place. There were 2 wills. Oliver and Art had somehow gained access to an older version and were using it to claim their inheritance, while the real final will was safely hidden with a different law firm. But why hadn't this Peterson and Associates contacted me after Ruth's death? Why was I only discovering this now? I reached for Ruth's letter with trembling hands and carefully opened the envelope. "My dearest Gary," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone and the boys have shown their true colors. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about all of this while I was alive, but I needed to be sure of what they were planning." The letter went on to explain how Ruth had grown suspicious when Oliver and Art suddenly became so attentive during her illness, not out of love, but because they were positioning themselves to control her estate. She'd hired Howard Peterson not just as an investigator, but as her attorney, moved the money to protect it, and created an elaborate plan to ensure I was taken care of. The boys think they're inheriting the house and the cabin, but what they don't know is that I've mortgaged both properties heavily in the past year. The house has a $580,000 loan against it, and the cabin owes $380,000 to creditors. They're not inheriting assets, Gary. They're inheriting debt. I stared at the letter, hardly believing what I was reading. Ruth had essentially given Oliver and Art a poison pill disguised as an inheritance. The life insurance policy they mentioned is real, but it's not for $140,000. It's for $320,000, and that extra money is meant to help you start over. Howard Peterson has the real will and all the documentation you'll need. Call him immediately after reading this. The final paragraph brought tears to my eyes. I know this seems cruel, but I couldn't stand by and watch them steal from you the way they've been stealing from everyone else. They made their choices, Gary. Now they have to live with the consequences. Take the money, start fresh, and don't look back. You deserves so much better than what they were planning to give you. Love, always, Ruth. 2 days later, I sat in Howard Peterson's downtown office, a modest place that felt more honest than the polished law firms Oliver probably frequented. Peterson was a straight-talking man in his 60s who'd clearly earned every gray hair. "Your wife was brilliant, Gary," he said, spreading documents across his desk. "She documented everything, every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer, every lie Oliver and Art told during her illness. If you want to pursue criminal charges, we have enough evidence to put them both away. What happens if I don't want to go that route? Then we let them hang themselves with their own greed." Ruth prepared for both scenarios. Peterson smiled grimly. "She said you'd probably choose the second option. Said you weren't vindictive, just wanted justice." What exactly will happen to them? They inherit properties worth $1.2 million, with mortgages totaling $960,000. That leaves them about $240,000 in debt they'll need to cover immediately. Given their existing financial problems, no bank will refinance them. They'll lose the properties and still owe the deficiency balances. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. Let's do it. The final meeting was at Dorothy's office. Oliver and Art arrived confident, even smug. They'd brought their own lawyer, a nervous young man who clearly didn't know what he was walking into. "Gary," Oliver said, settling into his chair like he owned the place. "We're glad you've come to your senses about this. Families should work together." "I agree completely," I said. "That's why I'm giving you exactly what you want." I slid the documents across the table. The house, the cabin, all the business assets. Just like your mother intended. Oliver grabbed the papers and began reading. His confident expression slowly crumbled as he worked through the legal language. "These properties have mortgages," he said slowly. "That's correct. The house has a $580,000 loan against it, and the cabin owes $380,000. But hey, you're getting exactly what the will specifies." Art's face had gone white. "This can't be legal. Mom wouldn't have—" "Oh, but she would have," Peterson interrupted, pulling out a thick folder. "Your mother was very thorough. She documented your gambling debts, Oliver. Your fraudulent business practices, Arthur. She knew exactly what kind of men you'd become." Their lawyer was frantically reading through the documents. "My clients need time to consider." "Actually, they don't," Peterson continued calmly. "They can accept their inheritance as legally specified, or Mrs. Foster will pursue criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence is overwhelming. The silence in that room was beautiful. Oliver's arrogance finally cracked, replaced by panic. Art looked like he was going to be sick. "What do you want from us?" Oliver asked quietly. "Nothing," I said. "I want you to take what you're legally entitled to and never contact me again." They signed. They didn't have a choice. 6 months later, both properties went into foreclosure. Oliver lost his financial advisor license when the investigation into his activities went public. Art's real estate business collapsed when his clients discovered the fraud. Both brothers ended up working retail jobs just to pay their basic expenses. I used the $750,000 from Ruth's account and the life insurance money to buy a comfortable house near Lake Tahoe, where Ruth and I had been happiest. At 59, I wasn't ready to fully retire, so I started a small contracting business specializing in home renovations for seniors. But the most satisfying thing I did was establish the Ruth Foster Foundation for Elder Financial Protection. We've helped 47 families avoid the kind of manipulation Ruth's sons attempted. And we're just getting started. Ruth always said she wanted to make a difference in people's lives. Sometimes when I'm sitting on my deck watching the sunset, over the mountains I think about Ruth and smile. She got the last laugh after all. Justice took time, but it found a way, just like she knew it would. The biggest mistake greedy people make is underestimating the quiet ones. We might not say much, but we see everything, and we remember even more. Ruth taught me that real revenge isn't about getting even. It's about letting people destroy themselves with their own choices while you build something better from the ashes.